Here now, John Bolton. He's the former U.S. ambassador to the UN and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador Bolton, good to see you again.
Glad to be with you.
All right. The president says basically these guys were caught red-handed. This is the tweet he sent out where he specifically says, caught red-handed, very disappointed that China is allowing oil to go into North Korea. There will never be a friendly solution to the North Korea problem if this continues to happen. And now we know Russia's there, able and willing to do the same. What happened to all the sanctions they signed on to?
Well, I don't think they were ever terribly serious about them. I think what happens in the Security Council is a lot of virtue signaling by some countries, and I think both China and Russia clearly have interest in keeping the North Korean regime propped up. Other governments do as well. I think Iran's a good example of that. So it's disappointing, but hardly surprising that we see these breaches of the sanctions resolutions. And it really leads to the question, is there anything else in terms of economic sanctions on North Korea that's going to make any difference? And I'm afraid, given North Korea's progress in terms of ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons, the answer to that's no.
Which leaves you where? What would our policy then be if we can't do anything more in the way of sanctions?
Well, I think the president tried to impress on China that we're really tired of their 25 years of playing around with this issue. The Chinese have long said we don't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons, but they have not done what they have the capability to do, in effect, to prevent it. So I think now the pressure really is on China. I think the president was very candid when he said, look, I left them alone on some of the trade issues because I wanted more effort on North Korea. That obviously didn't happen. So China's got to deliver in a very short period of time, or we face an unattractive, very unattractive binary choice. Either we leave North Korea with deliverable nuclear weapons, or we have to look at the use of military force.
But isn't there some in-between in here? In other words, the president's saying, look, I left them alone on trade. Well, why leave them alone on trade? If they're not doing what we need them to do, and by all accounts, they have the most intelligence on that regime and have the ability to either move him aside or really encourage him to denuclearize himself, why not actually start to invoke some of these economic measures when it comes to trade?
Look, if this were 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, there might be something to that. The problem now, and we've seen in the past year, with North Korea, by all accounts, in its sixth nuclear test, getting a thermonuclear device successfully fired, and in the progress it's made on ballistic missiles, that they're so close now to crossing that finish line, to being able to hit targets really all around the world, that by the time you mobilize and apply the sanctions effort, North Korea will have succeeded in getting the capability.
Perhaps I'm not clear. I'm not even talking just sanctions. I'm talking sanctions on steroids, as in a good old-fashioned trade war where we say, you know what, China, you're not going to be able to do business with us, and China needs us, Ambassador. You know, you think about China's surplus in trade. 68% of that surplus comes from the good old USA. So if we say enough and we're not going to buy your goods anymore, period, I would think they'd get the message.
Yeah, if the president had the authority to do that, which I don't think he does, without congressional legislation. And, you know, the other reality is, although China obviously depends on our purchases in the United States for a considerable part of their economy, the two are linked together. That's why I've never believed the threat of China holding American debt could really put us on our knees. It goes both ways. And you can like this or not like this, but the American business community is not going to sign on willingly to cutting off access, sanctions on steroids, as you put it, to the Chinese market.
So you're telling me that their bottom line, their profits, are more important than their patriotism? And
that's exactly
more
what they would tell
than
you.
Country.
Absolutely. They'd say, go pick on somebody else. You know the old tax slogan, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that fella behind the tree? That's what they'd all say. Absolutely. Tough pressure on North Korea, just not pressure on me.
Well, you know, it doesn't seem entirely right. Sometimes you got to make some sacrifices, and maybe it's time American corporations be willing to make those sacrifices for the sake of the country.
Look, on your show next week, call in the head of J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Ask them how they'd like to cut off banking access to the Chinese market.
I don't care about them. I care about the country, and I care about the fact that there could be a nuclearized North Korea that could inflict pain on us. And I just look at all of our options out there, Ambassador, and before we go straight to World War III, and believe me, we could, we ought to be willing to make these tough economic choices.
That isn't going to happen. But the question is, if you believe, and I think CIA Director Mike Pompeo basically said this, that North Korea is, let's say, within 6 months of being able to target the United States and actually hit the targets they aim for, you have to ask, how much damage could you do to China in that 6-month period? And I think the answer is precious little. I think you've got to go to China and argue their national interest is congruent with ours to getting rid of the regime in North Korea, reunifying the peninsula.
You're right. And that is important to China. They should not want a crazy man there who could hurt them as much as he could hurt us. So that may be the winning argument in all of it. But anyway, it's always good to see you, Ambassador. Thank you.
Glad to be with you. Happy New Year.
Yes, you too.